Hi and good evening. This is Anna and Andras live from Brussels.
Good evening, everybody.
And I think, Anna, your glasses are reflecting, so everyone can see the upcoming slides, not only on their screen, but also on your glasses. So a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining this call, this webinar. And we're just launching this video to say hi, and so you can attribute faces to the voice, but we won't be broadcasting our image throughout today. We want to make sure that you keep focused on the slides, on the presentation, and the content of today's webinar, which is the Absol CAST exams, which we're trying to demystify.
Indeed.
And answer all the questions you may have or you never even thought you had, but we will answer that in advance proactively. Make sense? Very good. So I'll turn off the camera, and the latecomers will miss our live image, but they will definitely see us or hear us throughout the next hour and a half. So thanks very much for joining us. And it says it's a live Q&A session. Regardless, we will be presenting quite a bit of information beforehand. And then throughout the presentation and also afterwards, we'll be answering all your questions that you may have. And make sure that you check the sound. Hopefully you can hear everything. If you cannot, well, you cannot even hear this one, but you will type it in the chat box if at any point the voice falls or disappears. Usually restarting your browser or opening the webcast or webinar in a different browser should do the trick. So I'll turn off the camera and let's get started.
Indeed.
Good. So with that, a couple of information about the sound check, as we said. And that's a little housekeeping. About our background, I don't think we want to say too much about ourselves. The point is to share useful, helpful information with you. As you probably know, my name is Andras Banet, and Anna.
Yes, my name is Anna Schmidt, and I'm a trainer at EU Training, but was a former recruiter in the EU institution. So I hope to help you a lot with demystifying the CAST examination.
Good. So the introduction and how we plan to do this is, as I said, there is going to be live questions, and you are welcome to put questions into the chat box. One important caveat, or perhaps request, if we may, is that a lot of questions, a lot of topics will be answered throughout our introduction. So perhaps you may wish to hold off asking the very detailed technical questions that you have in mind. Wait first for us to cover the fundamental core points of the CAST exams. And if your question has not been answered, you're more than welcome to put that into the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer it. And then we will send you the recording of the webinar with the slides and the actual recording itself. And whatever question we may not have time to answer, we will send you a follow-up Q&A transcript or a Q&A document along with a full transcript within a couple of days. So you get everything in your inbox, but you get the advantage of asking questions live, which we'll do our best to answer right away. And perhaps even more interestingly, those of you who are persistent enough and interested enough to stay until the very end, we're happy to offer a special promotion code in case you wish to start practicing for the CAST exam using our services. So with that, let's go into the actual substance.
So first of all, we will talk to you about what is actually a contract agent. So who are contract agents and what kind of positions they could eventually cover in the institutions and what are the conditions for their employment. Then we will talk a little bit about the CAST examinations and the difference between the CAST and the normal, usual large-scale EPSO competitions. We will also talk about the selection process itself. And then we will cover 11 frequently asked questions with regards to these CAST exam. And then we will also give you some tips to improve your chances. And then we will talk about resources, and then there will be the time for the questions and answers. So you will see if you can keep your questions all towards the end. Of course, if there's something really burning, do not hesitate and write it down. But we think that we will cover quite many things on our slides and with our presentation. So maybe it's better to wait until the end.
So here's a quick poll that we want to ask you about, which is your participation or the lack of it in the CAST selection process. So question, have you ever participated in the CAST selection? And our colleagues in Budapest will be putting up the vote. And in the meantime, we would like to thank them in advance for helping us. And it's Lenke and Veronica who are helping with answering technical or substantive questions. And they are the ones behind the engine to make sure everything runs smoothly. So with that, you have the little poll on the screen. Why don't you look at those three options and click the one that matches you best? So have you ever participated in a CAST selection? Yes, but have not been invited to sit the computer-based tests. You could choose yes and have set the computer-based tests as well. No, but considering it. So click the one that it relates to you the most, and let's see a quick poll with the answers. I think we could check the answers at this point. So we'll invite our colleagues to put up the results. So let's see. It seems many of you are considering the CAST tests, and some of you have already taken these tests, and some of you had the intention, but were not invited. So it's a pretty diverse picture, somewhat what we expected, and that's really helpful. So let's start at the very basics and look at the whole CAST concept and what is actually, or who is actually a contract agent. So
actually, these positions have been established in order to achieve flexibility in the EU workforce. So these are opportunities where you usually get a contract for a limited period of time. It's an excellent opportunity to get into one of the EU institutions or agencies without having to pass the full EPSO competition as such. Usually, however, these contracts, as I said, are for limited period of time, and I will tell you what are the exceptions to this rule, because this is not always, in not every contract, this is actually for limited time. So sometimes it can be for an indefinite period. It is with limited responsibilities. This is quite much the case in almost in all cases, meaning that even if you get a higher levels of contract agent position, so just to name it already, function group 4 position, which is usually the administrator level position, you will not be a team leader, you will not be responsible for a group of people, for instance. Less opportunities for career advancement. This means again that, for instance, you can get career advancement to some extent, so you can get into higher grades, but let's say the pace of this advancement is much slower than it would be for officials. Fewer mobility options. Again, just to pick an example, if you are in the delegation, you cannot move to the headquarters that easily, or you actually have to change from indefinite contract to definite contract in that case. So just to raise one example of that. Or if, for instance, you are in one of the executive agencies, you are linked to that agency, so you cannot change to another executive agency that easily. And then there's a lower, usually, salary which comes with this. Let's say the opportunities let's say the conditions are a bit less advantageous as for functionaries it would be.
Perhaps in one brief sentence to summarize it, it's a foot in the door. So it's your way to enter the institutions with certain limitations, but then it still provides you work experience. It provides you a better understanding of the institutions, and in one way or another, it can pay off. So that's a step into the realm of EU jobs. Let's look at the posts and conditions for contract agents, because that's an important aspect of what you can expect and has certain impact on the selection part as well.
Okay, so just to, well, I don't think that's very much, I mean, I wouldn't like to go too much into details, but what you should know that there are definite contract and indefinite contract possibilities with contract agent post. This means that the 3B type of contract agent positions are for definite duration. So these are those contract agents that are employed usually in the larger EU institutions, for instance, in the Commission. Here in one of the DGs, if you get a contract agent post, that will be for a limited period of time. What it also, however, means, and which is maybe something that is quite positive, I think, is that usually you are permitted, if you are there for a length of or a period of time, you are permitted to apply to internal competition. So this is something that could be, as András has explained, let's say an entry door to a functional post. Then there are 3A contracts. So these are, by the way, defined by the staff regulations, which some of you might know already, so which are establishing the rules for employing people in the institutions. So 3A contracts are the ones who are employed in the executive agencies and, if I'm not wrong, also in the delegations. These people cannot participate in the internal competition in the case of executive agencies. And then we will go to the next slide, which is about the delegations. And those are people who also can get indefinite contracts, but with access to the internal competition. So that's, again, something which is a kind of a favorable condition for the people who are serving in the delegations outside of the EU. And then there are regulatory agencies as well who can be found in most of the member states, and they also employ people with different temporary contracts, such as temporary agent positions or contract agent positions.
Just to sum it up, so essentially all of these are contract agent posts, right, with a fixed or with those caveats, terms for each contract, with slightly different overall descriptions, but all fall under the heading of CAST exams and contract agent exams. So let's look at it. What is the CAST exam?
So CAST stands for Contract Agent Selection Tool. What does that mean exactly?
I actually, Anna, when we were talking about this, I used to think, or that was my understanding, that CAST is Contract Agent for Select Tests or Selective Tests. So right. Probably there were different
understandings.
Different understandings.
In any case, everybody's using CAST, so don't worry. Nobody will ever, let's say, go into the details of this abbreviation.
That's perfectly fine. So let's look at what this selection tool is.
So it's an open-ended contract agent selection process, and it was introduced quite recently in 2017 with a pilot starting already in 2016. So this is a kind of selection process which was quite recently introduced in the institution. These competitions are organized by EPSO in order to improve transparency. And why transparency? Just to explain it a little bit more in detail. So there were already beforehand in the, 2005, 6, 7, you could already get a contract agent post in the institutions. But the process of selection and recruitment was very much non-transparent, meaning that basically, if in one of the unit there was a contract agent post, this was not really published anywhere, and simply by people knowing people were invited for a simple interview and got a post sometimes for a longer period of time. Then Absol decided that in order to make the process more transparent, there should be a kind of test that it needs to be passed by everybody who wants a contract agent post. And then in 2016, they started with a pilot only for the agencies. And then 2017, they started with a process that from then on, nobody could get a contract agent post anymore newly without actually passing this test. The selection exam includes verbal, numerical, and abstract reasoning tests and the field-related competency test.
And that's something we'll come back to in much more detail, because we're pretty sure that you are very interested how these compare to the administrator exams or the assistant exams, and especially what the field-related competency test is and what are the good resources and sources you could use for preparation.
And these exams are completed at a test center. So you have to go to a test center, which can be somewhere in Europe, doesn't have to be in Brussels. And it is a multiple choice questionnaire, which we will talk a little bit about more in detail, as András has said.
And there was one question which I will quickly address, whether if you apply and you take a CAST exam, can you take an AD exam or an AST exam? You absolutely can. So there's no exclusivity when it comes to these tests. You can take any other open competition as well.
Okay, this is just a quick overview of what are the different profiles that are currently published on Absol's website and what are the different so-called function groups. So today you can apply for a post, for instance, in finance, project management, in the area of secretarial job, political affairs, law, and many more. And different function groups apply or mean basically different levels for those who are performing those duties. Function group 2 means a more, let's say, administrative style of responsibilities. AST or FG3 is already a little bit advanced, let's say, but still means an assistant level job, while FG4 means administrative level job. However, just to add here immediately that, of course, very often these function groups are not meaning that in a function group 3 post, for instance, you couldn't have very important responsibilities. So these sometimes only, let's say, cover budgetary restrictions. So simply that there's, let's say, the institutions prefer to employ people at a lower grade. And still you will be able to perform duties which are higher than applicable to that function group. Of course, this can mean for some people great news. So yeah, even as a function group 3, I can be a legal advisor. Yes, you can. But in practice, you also have to know that it's sometimes not easy to change for a higher function group if you once are at a lower one. So just to tell you that, of course, this can be a source of, let's say, pleasure and frustration as well. So just to explain a little bit that they don't always mean that your responsibilities are really according to that function group. So that can vary very, very much.
But just to emphasize that this comes into play after you've passed the exam and you are in the actual job. So for the purposes of the selection, these are the formal boxes or the formal groups into which you apply. And here are 1 or 2 questions which might be worth addressing, though we will come back to this later, but since they came up, we'll get into it. It's the question is, can we take an EPSO CAST exam without applying for a concrete function group or vacancy?
So, well, you can register in the database. We will explain the process in a minute. So you can register in the database, definitely yes, so you don't have to apply for something. But what is important that you cannot sit the test without being invited by a recruiting service so a recruiting service needs to choose your CV and your application and send you for testing. Usually this happens in the case when they want you for a concrete position. So what will happen that you will be in the database and might not be invited for the testing, and you will be only invited in the case there's a concrete position for which your application is relevant and applicable, and the service wants to see you and wants to test you and wants to interview you afterwards. Then I saw another question which was quite interesting. So one of you asked if you can apply for several function groups. So yes, inside the same field, and actually it's better to do that because in some cases, for instance, if you applied both for FG3 and FG4, so function group 3, function group 4, and you passed the function group 4 test, you immediately have a function group 3 test as well. So simply the higher function group applies for the lower function group as well.
And does that need to be decided at the time of application or only when you are called to sit the test?
So I will give you, in any case, some tips how it's the best to do. In my viewpoint, the best if you apply to as many function groups as interests you, and also as many profiles as are interesting for you and where you have, of course, relevant experience.
So let's take an example. For instance, if you studied political science or law, you might have a relevant profile for political affairs, EU policies. You might have an applicable profile for law, and there might be one or two others. And within those profiles, you might be eligible for function group 3 and function group 4.
Go for all. Go for all.
Very good. Good. So let's look at the difference between the CAST exams and other EPSO competitions, the classic ones, administrators and assistants.
Okay, so EPSO competitions, these are, competitions that are announced regularly, while CAST competitions are, at any time. So you can go for them at any moment, whenever you would like to. There's no deadline. The only, let's say, thing is that there's a testing in every month. So basically, there's an ongoing possibility to go for a CAST. For EPSO competitions, you need to submit your application by a deadline. Why? For CAST competitions, you need to register yourself in the CAST database to participate, but there's no real deadline for that. Here in brackets, I will say, of course, that there are sometimes, agencies, for instance, may look for, I don't know, just to pick again the example of legal advisor, so might look for legal advisor and there's a deadline for the application. Then you have to be registered by that time in the CAST database. So it also is a bit, let's say there are different processes to look for candidates in the CAST database. And then sometimes there is a deadline, but then that is more applicable for the job application itself. Then EPSO competitions, everyone gets to see the computer-based test who is eligible, while in the CAST competition, the HR departments search for and select applicants from the database to see the computer-based test. So you don't automatically get into to sit the test, but you need to be selected by the HR services.
And here's an important question from Christian asking, after we are registered in the database, what should we do, if anything, to be selected by the HR services? That's another point we'll come back to, but let's address it right now.
Yeah, so we will come back to this, but I mean, there are several things you can do. It's a huge database. So what you should know that there are thousands and thousands of CVs in the database. So of course, it's very good if you can somehow reach out to the HR services directly. What are those means? Of course, if you, for instance, have some network in the institutions that can help you to be invited to, simply that they will know about you, that, hello, I'm here, I'm an expert, I'm interested, I'm looking for a job, and so on. So your network can always help you. Spontaneous applications as well. In some cases, these are waste of time, but in others, sometimes it can go through. So you never know. I think it's always good to do that. And I will give you some other tips as well, what you can improve in your application in order to be found in the database. So how can you stand out from the thousands and thousands? Okay, EPSO competition. So have to get one of the highest exam scores to be invited to the next stage of the competition, while in the CAST competition, reaching the pass mark for each of the tests is good enough. So it's really a huge difference between the two of them. Then the EPSO competitions, the tests designated to eliminate candidates, while in the case of CAST competition, you need to simply pass the test and then you will be invited for the job interview. So your marks will not count anymore, and that's very important as well. And as last, in the EPSO competition, you need to be on a reserve list to get invited for the job interview. And in the CAST competition, technically, it's not a competition, so you are not really directly competing against each other. And that's, again, a strong, let's say, difference between the two, because simply you are not direct competitors. You can all pass it, and then all can be invited for an interview. So that's no competition against each other. Then let's talk about the CAST selection process.
So let's look at the various steps, which we divided into 6 parts for the selection process, and walk you through that, because it might be a little confusing. This is what I find from questions that I often get, and probably you as well, Anna, where there's quite a bit of confusion of which step follows which one, of do you register first, do you take the exam first, when comes your preference into play, of which area you want to apply for, and which kind of jobs that you are eligible for. So let's look at the first one.
So first of all, fill in the application form to be added to the CAST database. This is very important. Of course, without this, you will never see the CAST test. So
let's hang on a second here to discuss what that application entails. So do you need to optimize it and be very verbose and very detailed in what your profile is about, what your preferences are? Should you stack it with keywords? Is that a good tactic, or this is purely a formality?
Okay, so András is already covering some of those ideas that are very important indeed. So well, I have sat on the other side, so I know how the recruiter portal looks like and how recruiters are looking in the database. It's a bit like a Google search. So simply there's a search option where recruiters can search for different keywords. Just to give you an example, in my past, I needed to look for engineers who have a background with working with raw materials, and then I simply wrote into the search engine raw materials, and then I got all kinds of non-relevant results sometimes, but of course I got those few, let's say about, I can say 60, 70 CVs that were relevant and that I could find as somebody who is relevant to this profile. So just to give you other idea, for instance, I did a search for mining engineers, and then I got a lot of responses with data mining, which is of course not something that I was looking for, but just to show you how this search is working. And as András, in a way, a bit anticipated or suggested, so it's good to have long CVs, because of course your profile will be more relevant if the keywords are coming up there many times. And yes, put there some keywords which could be very relevant to your profile.
By the way, Anna, just as a little off question there, is you probably don't want to make your CV too long and visually not appealing, but perhaps you want to actually add a section in the very end saying keywords. So would you put there a couple of sort of tags, keywords that would describe your profile, saying for you would say HR, recruitment, interview techniques, cognitive psychology, whatever it is?
I think this is a very good idea, and of course you don't want to make your CV not appealing, but at the same time you can. While in other cases, I would suggest you to go for a page, maybe 2 pages CV, or maximum 4 in the case of Europass CV. Then in this case, yeah, just go ahead, make it a bit longer, no problem. Upload your CV, that's another thing. So it's usually many people only fill in the application form, then upload your CV as well. The recruiting services select you to sit the CAST exam afterwards. So this may happen because you applied for a published job or you were invited via a CAST search process. So just to go a little bit into details, there are basically 2 ways to get a contract agent post. One of them because a post was published somewhere and you apply, and at the same time you apply also to the CAST database. Another thing is that you simply wait there and you don't fill in any application, and you hope that through a CAST search a recruiting service is running into your CV. So there's 2 ways. And just to let you know that many agencies, delegations only do CAST search. So simply they don't publish openly any positions. Others do. So if you know that you are particularly interested in some regulatory agency in a particular country and that you want to work there, check their website. And you will see at the point, if they never publish anything, that's for a reason. They only do CAST searches. In other cases, you will see that there are some open positions there. Apply to the post and also keep your CAST, your application active in the CAST database.
A question I actually wanted to ask you on behalf of our listeners, whether your CV should be Europass format or any other. What is your suggestion? I have quite strong personal views about the Europass format, with all respect, which is rather critical. But then in terms of the institutions, what do you suggest to candidates?
It's simply, I think, what I would do is a bit use the Europass format, but feel free to modify it a bit. So you can simply save it to your own computer, cut a bit of the spaces, don't use parts which are not important. And in any case, what I also... Yeah, I mean, it's just simply easier for the recruiting services to compare you with, with the other candidates on the basis of the same style of CV. That's why they prefer it. I mean, I agree. It's not a sexy format, but yeah.
I think there were some efforts recently from, probably it was DG ACK, who proposed a revised or updated format for the Europass. So we can certainly support their endeavors.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I also always suggest to add some things which are not, allowed by the system. But then if you save it to your own computer, then you can make some modifications by yourself.
Fine. So let's look at the computer-based tests, because that's an interesting part which happens regularly.
Yes. I mean, the preparation is pretty much the similar as it would be for an Absol competition. So practice regularly verbal, numerical, abstract reasoning tests. And besides of those, you also have to pass one, field-related questionnaire as well. Depending on which profile you go for, you will have also multiple choice questions in the field of HR, finance, and so on. And if you pass this, then the recruiting service is obliged to interview you. Many people don't know this. So many people actually think that there's no obligation. There is. So if you are not invited, so if you successfully pass a CAST and you are not invited for an interview afterwards, then you can complain to Absol, because this is not according to the rules.
That's an important part. So you are invited to the tests, you pass those, and then you are not invited for an actual interview. So here's a question coming in. How long do you need to wait? How patient should you be? And what happens if you are not invited for 2 or 3 months?
Well, that's too long, definitely. So what should happen that if you have set the test, then you let's say the results should be out in about a month's time, and then afterwards the interview should take place very soon. I would say in 3 weeks, 4 weeks time. If it doesn't happen, yeah, of course you can send a reminder if you knew who sent you, because sometimes you will not know who is the service who has sent you, so it's not always very clear. But then if you don't know yet, you can always send simply an email to Absol and simply try to get the information out of them and make sure that you will get an interview, because this is something that of course is part of the process. And then, if you pass the interview, then you may get offered a contract agent position or a role somewhere in the delegation, in the agencies, or in one of the main EU institutions. Okay, let's go to the frequently asked questions. So, if I fail a CAST test, can I repeat it? Yes, definitely yes. So what you will need to do is to wait for 6 months to be tested again. This is clearly, so they store the data when you took it the last time, and then in 6 months' time you can sit it again. The reasoning test, you can do it for the same or for higher function groups, and the competency test for the same or higher function groups as well. So no problem, you can repeat it, but you will have to wait 6 months. Also redo it after a time. Elapses doesn't happen automatically, so it's very important. You need to be selected again by an institution, agency before getting another chance. So the same rules apply again. So you cannot be invited or cannot be invited for sitting the test. Somebody has to put your name in the system in order to be invited. I see a question here. If one fails a CAST test, can one pass an AD test, EPSO test within 6 months? Absolutely yes. So there is no interlink between these tests. But you need to know that these are simply different examination, different tests, or you always start with a blank page. The next question, or next important point that I always get as a question: may I apply to several profiles and function groups? As I said already, yes, you can, and I also strongly advise you to do that. So this is something that is very good to do, to apply and to be actively, if you are actively looking for a post, then you have much more chances if you are in several function groups and profiles. Is it possible that the recruiting service may want to interview me first before inviting me to take the computer-based test? Well, sometimes this does happen. So what recruiting services sometimes do is that they do a kind of a pre-interview. So they want to make sure that they only indicate names in the system that they are actually very much interested in. So what they do is a pre-interview before sending people to sit the CAST exam. So this could happen. If I'm working in an institution with a different type of temporary contract, so for instance, you are a temporary agent or attached national expert, and I'm close to the end of my contract, is it a good idea to ask my hierarchy to invite me to sit a CAST exam? So just to explain you, in case you have this different, temporary kind of contract, it's something very, very good to do. Of course, it depends sometimes whether you are interested in a contract agent post. As I explained, the conditions might be not as good as for temporary agents. But this is, of course, another way to extend your contract or to have a longer contract. So this is something that is good to do, simply because sometimes recruiting services, so HR units, are looking for people who already have a past CAST. So they don't need to wait for candidates who need to go through the whole process of starting, indicating the name. Then the testing is probably about 1 month's time from that. Then again, the result takes like one more month. So probably until they can interview a candidate, they need to wait 2 to 3 months. And then, of course, in order, especially when they want to fill a post very rapidly, they will prefer people who already have passed the CAST exam. So what you can always do, if you are already in the institutions and if you can lobby for yourself with your head of unit, with your HR department, ask them to send you for a CAST. This will not mean that you will have an interview. Often this means that you simply sit the test without an interview, but having the CAST exam in your pocket will be probably helping you in your future career and to find a post easily. Okay, next question. Is the field-related competency test EU specific or not? So not necessarily. This is really usually something which is related to the field. So for instance, to finances, to human resources, to law. So very often these are not related to anything in the institutions. They only simply require prior knowledge in this area of work. So it doesn't have to come from the EU. Okay, I just see a question here now. I've worked 6 years in the Commission. Now I'm working since 10 years as a contractual agent. Is it a possibility to go back to work in the Commission? So yes, what happens, and I have to admit, I don't know how long time do you need to wait until you can go back. If I'm not wrong, it's 6 years again. But after a given period of time, so if you have done 6 years in the institutions, then you work somewhere else, you simply pass these 6 years, then you can return again and restart in a contract agent position. So there's indeed a period of time until when you cannot go back, but then you can. Okay, then just to check what is the next question. So is the verbal, numerical and abstract test as difficult as at the AD competitions? So in general, what I can say that I think it's a bit easier, and simply just because of the fact that you only need to reach a threshold. So a pass mark is enough, that you are not competing against others. So in the case of AD competitions, of course, you have to reach the highest possible mark. And probably if you lose many points, you have no chance to pass to the next phase. While here, if you are able to simply reach this threshold, nobody will care about your marks anymore afterwards. So I would say it's a little bit easier, but still require proper preparation, proper practice, especially because these tests, if you do them for the first time, they can be pretty tricky. So it's good to practice before. Is it enough for me to simply apply for a contract agent post? So I tried to explain this already before. You may be required to send also your CV and cover letter to the place of recruitment. So what could very well happen as well, that you have to send your application to the position which is published. So it's not enough to be registered in the CAST database, but you also have to express your interest in a particular position. So this is really something that is important to take into account. You have to do both of these.
Number 8, is it possible to upgrade from a contract position attained through the CAST process to a permanent role? And I think this is of concern to a lot of people, where we mentioned at the very beginning, the foot in the door, and can you actually enter the house and stay there?
So, yeah. This is what I wanted to say, that of course there's no possibility really to upgrade. So this is not something that would be available.
In legal terms.
In legal terms, what you can do in some cases, and as I explained the difference between different contract agent possibilities, sometimes you can apply, for instance, for internal competitions, which are somewhat easier than the external competitions. So this will give you some help in order to get into the institutions.
Number 9, how often will I need to sit the CAST exam? Or how often can I sit the CAST exam?
So, if you successfully pass each test, the reasoning test is valid for 10 years. So this is something that is important to take it into account. So this will be valid for 10 years, and the competency test results are valid for 5 years. So this could be, of course, important if, for instance, you pass a CAST exam, but you don't manage to get into, so you don't pass successfully the recruiting interview. And then, of course, your CAST will be in your hand and you will need to pass another interview. But this will be, the CAST exam will be valid minimum for 5 years, at least the competency test part, and the reasoning part for 10 years.
All right. What if I, not what if, but if I pass the CAST tests, but I want to improve on my scores, can I take the test again? And is there an advantage actually having a high score at the exam?
I think I've already said that this is not really important. So actually, your results will be not even visible to the recruiting services. So they will not know anymore. Simply they will see that you have passed or you haven't passed, and the marks doesn't matter.
And then last but not least, if I'm invited to a CAST interview, will it be like an EPSO competency-based interview, or will it be different?
So this is really a proper normal job interview, which may include competency-based interview questions, but will not only be that. So what you should prepare is that there will be probably more technical style of questions. There will be questions with regards to your background, with regards to your motivation, and there could be competency-based questions, but not necessarily only.
Good. So let's look at a couple of tips how to improve your chances of success of getting picked and passing the tests or passing the interview.
Okay, this we have already told you, but I cannot emphasize it overly. So apply to as many fields as possible when you have a relevant profile to all of those. So submitting multiple applications does not necessarily increase the chances, but of course, this could serve you, and of course, you have more chances in different fields. So this is something that you could do. Don't forget to tailor make always your application. So always apply to different profiles with different applications. Upload your CV as well. As I explained, this is something that could further, let's say, serve as a basis for finding your application among the relevant ones with the keywords. So this is something that the application form by itself is not enough. It's better to have the CV as well. Make sure to use the keywords. We have discussed this already with András.
And I think finding the keywords or deciding which keywords you could use in your profile partly depends on you, because you're the one who studied a certain area and you're applying in a certain field. But you may want to look at a couple of job descriptions or vacancy notices and see what are the keywords that the institutions use. So familiarize yourself with those keywords that perhaps DG DEFCO, the Development Corporation, or commission service or an executive agency or a regulatory agency might be using, like the Food Safety Authority or any other, and making sure that the terminology matches their jargon, and not necessarily you are the one who invents those or uses the one that you had learned at university or used in a given job.
And Agnieszka has a great question here. So she says, I need to pass the CAST in order to extend my contract. So she was hired for 3 years, but can be now extended for 3 more years. Is it the same procedure? Yes, so it's the very, very same procedure. There are many people actually who are currently working as contract agent and has not yet passed the CAST exam, simply because the CAST examination was introduced relatively recently. So it's the very same procedure. And the question is, I will need to, whether she will be needed to be invited for an interview to be extended. Well, I would say not necessarily. So simply maybe they will just say that we extend you without an interview. We know that you do your job very well, and that's it. So there's no absolute need for that.
And then as a tip we would like to share here, aside from the keyword part, is to indicate your ongoing interest, make sure that you update your application and perhaps even your CV every couple of months. So
you have to do it actually every 6 months, otherwise you are not visible anymore in the system. So make sure that every 6 months this is really done.
Perhaps here's a question that others would be interested in. Does it make sense from a search or from a recruiter perspective to have the CVs or the applications updated every 3 months? So do you get the results in the database according to the most recent updates, or just simply it's based on keywords and other factors, and updating it in 5 months or updating it in 2 weeks would not make any difference in the search results?
That doesn't really make any difference. It's simply, on the basis of the keywords. So that's the most important. I also got another question. So I'm selected to sit the CAST exam. Do I get to choose when I will sit the exam, or is it predefined by the recruiting service? So you will be, if I'm not wrong, what you can choose is between a couple of dates. So you will be invited to sit the exam. For instance, if they indicate now your name, you will probably sit the exam in December, most likely. And then you will be able to choose between 3-4 dates, so not more. So you can't really select too much.
Here's another question, which we'd like to address at this point, as I think it's relevant for many of you. So passing the reasoning test, so the abstract verbal numerical reasoning test, but failing the competency test, do you need to sit the reasoning test again, or just the competency test?
Just the competency test.
That's perhaps good news for many of you, except for those special candidates who actually love abstract reasoning or love numerical reasoning. Good.
And well, this I have already told you, but I think it's a very good idea to lobby for yourself. There's better chance that they will find you if they know about you. Maybe, Andres, you have some good suggestion, as you know quite some about lobbying.
Yeah, it's, well, the best lobbying serves an existing need. So it's very hard to create a need in terms of recruiting you if there is no actual need among the institutions or a given department for a position that you are applying for. So it partly depends on you observing the developments in your field and making sure that your profile truly matches the one that you're applying for. So if you happen to have a linguistic background and you're applying for a position in financial services, it might be a difficult sell. But if politically speaking, there are certain areas which are very important / popular, so thinking of the key priorities of the incoming Commission President, or looking at certain EU agencies and their tasks becoming more important, therefore they want to recruit, and that matches your profile, that's a great opportunity. If you are on the radar of those services, so you've passed the necessary tests, you perhaps even had interviews, you're certainly in a much better place. In that case, is truly making everything that's in your power that you are electable, that you are recruitable. I think even about logistical issues, that you are willing to go to an interview, an in-person interview on short notice, or you're willing and able to relocate if the job happens to be in a different country where you are currently based. So all of these things matter. And then we actually have quite a few free resources and also a paid webinar on how to find an EU job once you're on the reserve list. That's mostly targeted at EPSO candidates. EPSO as in the administrator and assistant, and how to optimize your CV. But we also have one, if you just Google 14 tips for an EU career, that also shares a lot of information, and it's a free resource, a free webinar where you can find ideas.
Okay. Let's see what else. So when you are invited to sit the computer-based test, take your preparation seriously. This is something that you should absolutely do. So as I said, you only need to reach the pass mark. However, it's not always easy, and especially if you go, if you go unprepared, and if it's something quite new for you, this is something that you should practice and on a regular basis.
Yes, perhaps to add to that, in terms of the practice, it's vital because you don't have so many opportunities to pass those tests. Well, as Anna described before, the rules, whether you can retake it or not, but still, once you are given a chance, use it wisely and make sure that you pass those. You don't need to have very high scores, so you basically need to pass with a good enough mark, but the competition is still fierce, so practicing and being able or being ready for the competition is really important.
And then what else can you do in order to prepare for the field competency test? So you can join EPSO CAST exams Facebook group to read feedback from other experiences. This is something you should definitely do. There are quite some tips there from other people. Then you can practice competency test simulation available on our website, so on EU training website. There's CAST profile test for each of the profiles, so this is really a good resource. And then you can refresh your general knowledge and do some research on the profile that you are being invited for. So this will, of course, also help you to be ready for the field-related test.
A couple of other points which I presume would be helpful. When you are preparing for the competency test, we assume that that's your background. So that's what you studied and you have a relevant profile. So that's the area you allegedly know the most about. Having said that, you probably want to revise the latest developments and what might be interesting for the institutions. One of my key go-to resources for specific areas tends to be annual reports. And those are fairly good references. Even if an institution or a department or a DG has very comprehensive annual reports, you can skim through it, you can read the executive summary, you can have a rough idea of what are the key important topics in that field. Another pretty good resource tends to be press releases because they are by definition rather short and to the point about the latest developments. So these could be good and relatively quick, relatively limited resources to revise, and that should help you get up to speed in a given area. And then another question I wanted to address was, yes, actually
there's an interesting question here. If I pass an FG3 project management profile, and am I eligible for the FG2, including finance and others, or I need to retake the competency test for the relevant field? So you are only, you are eligible, but you haven't got yet a test for that. So what you need to do is that you have to apply for both of the tests. You can go for the higher test, and then you automatically will get the lower function group as well, in case your name is indicated for both of the profiles. So you don't have to sit it twice. You go for the FG3, and you are automatically in for the FG2 as well, in case your name was indicated for both of them, but not in any other case and not in other fields. So for instance, if you go for project management, you are both in FG3 and FG2, yes, then your successful FG3 applies for the FG2, but not, for instance, for finance. So that's another thing. You have to take the competency test.
So it's rather vertical and separated in that sense.
Yes, definitely, yes.
With the higher level taking priority over the lower.
Yes. Then some selection interview tips. So some of you actually asked already in the chat box whether we have some tips for that. So as the competition also in this case is usually very high, so make sure that you prepare well for these interviews. So for instance, if it's for a position in the delegation, sometimes there's only one post and there's several people who have set the CAST test. So it's something very important to be very well prepared for the interview. In the case of executive agencies, sometimes they do reserve list themselves, meaning that they interview several people and maybe they don't offer a post for everybody. They simply do a reserve list, which is valid for a year. Usually these are extended as well. But what is important to know that you still have to pass an interview with a huge panel with 3 or 4 people sitting in front of you. So these are quite serious interviews. So be ready in this case to do a proper presentation of yourself, to talk about your motivation, to cover technical questions, and be ready also for some competency-based questions. Of course, these questions may vary from position to position, from different institutions, but these are very common questions that are asked at an interview. And what, of course, we can always suggest, come for coaching. I'm very happy to help you together with my colleagues in order to enhance your chances for success.
There was a question here about which competencies would be the most relevant to emphasize or to improve when it comes to the CAST interviews.
I would say that working with others is very common to be tested. So how do you work in intercultural organizations? How do you work with people coming from different cultures, different backgrounds? Very often resilience test is among, so when you have to work under pressure, very tight deadline. And what of course could come as well is learning and development. So these are very common things to be asked. I usually would count that there would be at least one negative question. So they love to ask questions when you failed, when you didn't manage with something. So don't only prepare for positive examples, but also negative ones.
Another aspect to this is what happens when you are in an interview, or you've done an interview, but you are not selected for the job. What are you supposed to do then?
Well, of course.
Well, apart from proving your resilience and saying, I don't give up.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to say. Don't give up. So what I would say that, of course, as I said, you have better chances, especially in the big institutions. So if you want to apply to a post in the commission, there are plenty of contract agents employed in the commission. And as I said, most of these positions are not advertised. So especially if you have a rather specific profile, or you really think that you could fit into one directorate general more than to the other, then lobby for yourself, send your CV around, state that you already have a CAST exam, because of course it's quite relatively easy to employ you after that. It's simply an interview for them and you can be on board very soon. So this is something that, of course, recruiting services will appreciate.
You mentioned something really important, which might sound obvious to some of you, but not so intuitive to others, is emphasize that you've passed the CAST selection. This may not be entirely clear or obvious or directly available as a piece of information to the recruitment services or to the actual DGs or units that are hiring. So they may not bother or take the effort to look up your name in the database and say, oh, is this person actually in the CAST, because they have such a nice profile that we would really be interested in hiring her or hiring him. So if you, let's say, spoon feed that information in your cover letter and say, I've passed the following test, I'm eligible, I'm electable, I'm recruitable, and please hear me out, and here I am. So make sure that you emphasize that information.
And there's a question from Marcia. So if I'm not invited, I cannot sit a CAST exam, correct? Yes, unfortunately it is correct. So you have to be invited to sit the test. That's the difficult step indeed. So how to be invited?
Here's another question slightly related to this, and we can come back to that point. What is the difference between an application and the CV? So an application is does not equal the CV only.
No. So the application is the application form. So you have to fill in an application form when you apply for the CAST exam. You have to name, for instance, 2 main achievements. You have to fill in the different form with your birth date, with your name, with your phone number, your email address, and so on. Everything needs to be filled out there. And also, you can upload your CV, which is not a must, but I strongly advise you to do it.
Another point, a comment/question came in regarding the test timing. So Anna, you mentioned that you're given a couple of date options, which one of our listeners confirms that was his or her experience, that they had to do the test within 10 days. So you mentioned a month time or less. In that case, we hear that it was 10 days. So is there a chance there won't be time to prepare for the test? So can they invite us to a test within a very short time frame?
Well, usually that shouldn't be the case, but of course there are always, let's say, not everything is always run smoothly by Absol, to say. So it could happen that, of course, they should give you more notice than 10 days, but this can happen that it's rather short, especially around holiday periods. There could be some delays. Yes, delays.
Perhaps also it relates to the urgent recruitment need of a given DG or a given institution, or you think that's less of a factor?
I think it's less of a factor. So what happens that the recruiting services, they have to indicate the names whom they want to test by a given date. And then sometimes the tests could run late and so on. So there could be things that are affecting these. So what I would like to emphasize that you will usually have more than 10 days to prepare for this, but unfortunately, this could sometimes come. Just simply go for it. I mean, don't lose your chance. Go for the test in any case.
I think this is a little bit like being prepared for a sports competition where you don't necessarily know when it's happening. So you need to keep your muscles, or in this case, your skill set fresh and trained, in order to be deployable at short notice, which, as we heard and we see, often happens within a couple of weeks or just a couple of days. A few quick rapid-fire questions. Are the CAST exams always happening in Brussels, or these happen outside?
So you can choose your test center. So you can do it in other member states as well. So you can do it in Italy, in Spain, and so on.
But not outside the EU, as far as I know.
No, not outside of the EU. And of course, there's limited possibilities. So inside Italy, I think you can do it in Milan and Rome, for instance. I'm not sure even, but you don't have it in every city. So you have to choose from a few options.
Another quick question: is working experience a must in CAST competitions?
I would say it's not a must, but it depends. So you will need to check the eligibility criteria for the different function groups. I'm not sure what is the minimum, but I would say at least 1 year of experience would be a necessity. But this you can check. So if you go and you read the eligibility criteria, you will know it. Because of course there are, for instance, for function group 4, you cannot apply if you don't have a university degree. So there are eligibility criteria we should check before applying to any of these.
Another question was, if I was invited for a CAST exam, is it possible to postpone it?
It's not easy. So when you got already the invitation, you can choose between a few dates, as I explained, but it's not easy to pass it to a next month. And especially what I would be afraid of is that the recruiting services will lose their interest in you simply because they will have to wait too long. But you need to see that it's at least 2-3 months to pass the whole CAST, thing, so that they indicate your name, you go for the test, you have a result, and then they can invite you for an interview, which they probably will give you at least a 2-3 week deadline for that as well. So altogether, it's still kind of a lengthy process just to fill one position. So I'm not sure they would be willing to wait in case you want to postpone it. So in case you can, try to take it in that period.
And to emphasize that point, so the CAST exam, or actually the whole process serves a very specific and timely hiring need from the given unit or department or institution. So because of that reason, if you postpone it by a couple of months, the need might no longer be there, just as Anna explained. The interview, where does it take place?
So usually this is taking place in the place of recruitment, so where they would like to recruit you to. Of course, if, for instance, it's in the delegation, it might happen through Skype. Also, in case if you are out of Brussels and the position is in Brussels, then they might prefer to use Skype for the reason. So they might actually be willing to do it in a different format. But very often, for instance, if it's an agency running a large recruitment process, then they are willing to pay the costs of travel fees. So they would pay your ticket and your hotel. So this is usually the case. So most of the time, actually, you would do it with the recruiting services in person.
Another fairly practical technical question. A person was once hired as a contract agent, and the first contract is for 1 year or 3 years. And is it renewed year after year, or what is the typical approach?
So it depends. I can't give you an exact answer. But I do know that, for instance, in the case of indefinite contracts, there was a recent change in the implementing rules. These are modifications of the staff regulation, just to explain a bit the technical terms that I'm using. So before you had first a 2-year contract, the 1-year extension, and then indefinite contract for the lifetime of the given agency. But they changed it, and they changed it in favor of the contract agent. So now this is 1+1 and then indefinite contract. So this has changed to, let's say, better conditions. Of course, you have to serve also probationary period, which is 9 months. But otherwise, it's relatively fast and rapidly becomes indefinite contract.
Another question that comes in, and then we'll look at a couple of resources we recommend. So in the application form, there are a couple of questions about your general interest to apply, your contribution to the EU, your strengths. If there is no specific vacancy yet, how should you answer these questions?
Yeah, you are absolutely right that it's not easy to give very specific answers. But what I would try to think about these examples, especially when you have to say in the last, I think there's 2 questions about main achievements. So be very specific, raise some examples that are demonstrating where good generic competencies that are needed in any position. And what I would suggest you to do is also really think over what is your main motivation to work in the institution and what could be your real contribution, and be specific about it. So think over what makes you different from the others. Why are you better than the others?
I would use the word different, positively different. But we actually have a webinar on the motivation part of the general EPSO competitions. I believe at least part of it is completely free with transcript and everything. So you might want to check it out. And I'll ask our colleagues in Budapest to send that link in the follow-up message that we will circulate. So let's look at a couple of resources and we'll come back to the questions because there are quite a few still that we have time to answer. Here are the preparation resources we suggest. So Anna mentioned the EPSO CAST exams Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, and engage with other candidates, learn from their experience, hear rumors, with the caveat that those are rumors, but sometimes very technical answers can come from the group, from those who have passed the exam or who have been in your shoes. Actually, I see that they already posted into the chat box the motivation webinar, so you can directly access it. Do not click it, stay with us, because that's something, a link to be saved for later. And then what else? There is application assistant. So we offer that as a service for the CAST application, for your CV. You can send a request. This is a paid service that we offer because our experts need to pay dedicated attention to your profile. But we've received very positive feedback that this is a helpful way of tailoring your application and standing out from the pool of other candidates. And then there are a lot of free webinars, which you might be aware of, but in case not, here is a list. So we have lots of free webinars and transcripts with them, with Beginner's Guide to the Abstract Verbal Numerical Reasoning, and there are a couple of other premium webinars on similar topics. And there's this very webcast, but other e-learning resources and math refresher if numerical reasoning is not your cup of tea. But after that webinar, you'll be as enthusiastic as ever. So you could also have a couple of simulated practice tests, including the field-related competency tests. So that helps you understand the focus and the topics that you need to revise when you are preparing for the specific tests. So we try to make it as practical as possible. So practice makes perfect. That's really the mantra, where depending on your current state in some of these tests should be helpful. And in case you wish, we offer personal coaching for the computer-based tests and also for the interview. So these are services which are readily available. And now we encourage you to ask questions, but I won't encourage you more because we have quite a few in our list. So we'll spend the remaining time answering those. But I'd like to highlight this special promotion we're offering to you with 20% off on all the Absol CAST practice packages and the webinar recordings, the ones I mentioned. There is the code called CAST 2019, and it's only valid for 48 hours, which is until Saturday, 12th of October. So if you're interested, I do encourage you. So while I leave it on the screen, why don't we look at a couple of other questions, Anna? And I'll quickly scan these and read out to you. Here's one. Yep. What about traineeship? So Blue Book traineeship, does it help you be more eligible or be called for a CAST exam, or it doesn't really matter?
I would say that, of course, this is something that the EU institutions will always value, that you are somebody who already have some experience, some understanding throughout your Blue Book traineeship. So I would say that this will be not the main, let's say, selection method for them, or that they will not select you on the basis of that only, but this is definitely something that will work in your advantage.
Another one, if you lobby, or when you lobby, because we encourage you to always do that, but when you lobby, when you try to find or get more visibility for your profile, for your application, at what level is it better to send your spontaneous application? To a policy officer, head of unit, director? What would be your advice?
Well, I would definitely try with the head of unit level and maybe HR services as well. So I would suggest this too. I wouldn't really go too much high because I don't think it really makes any sense. They will not spend the time. Director general will not read the CVs. So I wouldn't advise you to do that.
I tend to agree with that. And regarding the HR services, I think there was a question earlier. How can you find the HR services? And there are pretty transparent and readily accessible organizational charts for each commission DG, Directorate General. Same thing for agencies, same thing for any other EU institution. And then there is even an EU who is who. I think that's what it used to be called, but it might still be called that way. So you can look up any head of unit and you can send those emails. With the caveat, of course, that if it's a spontaneous application, they may not react, they may not get back to you. This is something which entails a certain expectation, or you should curb your enthusiasm, but definitely give this a try if your profile and your background is relevant to a given post or a given unit. All right, is it smart to refuse a test, an invitation to a test, a possibility, when there's only a short preparation period? So are you going to be then blocked from taking the tests, or what are the risks if you decide not to sit at a test?
Listen, my advice, I wouldn't refuse it, because I think it's not easy, as I said, to stand out from the database. So if you were selected, I would go for it. Otherwise, in any case, if you decided not to go for it, then no, you are not blocked. So you simply stay available in the database. But I would advise you to take the chance and go for it.
In terms of the difficulty of the tests, what is your advice, Anna? Is it similar to AD level? So when you're preparing for CAST 3 or a function group 3 or function group 4, would that be comparable to the AD level abstract verbal numerical? I would say yes. And generally, our advice is make sure the practice is more difficult than the actual exam, because otherwise you would be quite surprised.
Yes, I mean, as I said, I think the main difference between the two tests is that here you only need to reach a threshold, a thresh mark, and then not you don't need to be among the best ones. But otherwise, the style of the test is pretty much similar to the AD one.
Here's a question about the CAST of 2007. So those who have been around the EU system long enough to remember the 2007, is it still searchable by the services? So that was the old system, which as far as I'm aware has been replaced, overtaken by the new one. But Anna, do you have any experience with that, or have you had you used it when you were?
Yes. And I did use it, and it's a good question whether it's still available or not. To be honest, I don't know.
But as we always advise candidates, I will get back to you after this session.
Indeed. So I will check it for you, and we'll hope to give you a response very soon about it, following up your question.
Yeah, good. I'm just browsing through the other questions that have come in. Yes, this we answered. Here is a question. Is the CAST valid regardless of the institution that has invited you? So if I pass the test after I've been invited by the Commission, can I later participate in an interview from the Parliament?
Yes, absolutely, yes. So this is something that is valid to everybody afterwards. Simply in the recruiting portal, under your name, all the competitions, all the CAST exams are visible. So simply even if you have passed a functioneer competition to any level, that will be visible there as well. So all the competitions, all the profiles, everything is visible under your name.
Right, and I think this is fantastic crowdsourcing that's happening here. We're so grateful to you that you're sharing your knowledge with not just us but other candidates. So we see that the 2007 database is still searchable, but you cannot update anymore the data in it. But the CAST is valid, so we'll look into that. And it seems
yes, I definitely
reasonable.
know that it was valid until last year. So I'm very glad it's still probably then valid. What I usually, in my experience, if you passed any CAST, they usually, don't really. So they still try to use those lists from the past. So good to know that it's still valid. Very good.
Right. What about language? In which language are these exams? Is it mostly English or other languages?
Very good question. So what I would strongly advise you to do, that if you know that you are interested in a more French-speaking service, then use French for your application. And if you are more interested in English-speaking service, then use English. Because what happens that unfortunately the system is not able to translate. Therefore, if the service the recruiting service is using English to look, to search the CVs in the database, then if you used French, your CV will not come up as relevant, which is kind of a pity, but this is how it is. If you, for instance, know that you are interested in a delegation in a more of a French-speaking country, then use French. So it depends what is where your area where your interest lies.
And then, in formal terms, what the law requires, or more specifically, the notice of competition, is that for language 1 you need minimum level C1. So that's pretty much mother tongue level or fluent level in one of the EU's 24 official languages. And then for language 2, it's English, French, German, as long as it's different from your main language.
And with regards to this, so what I think is important is that don't be shy. So it's a clear mistake to signal that you only have a B1 level when you are at, let's say, at the margin of B2, go for the B2, because they might simply exclude you because your language is not strong enough. So just go for the higher level, because this shouldn't be the point where they eliminate you.
Another question on a slightly different angle. So what about the recruitment services? Are they obliged to give information to successful candidates in the CAST exams regarding the process, or the candidates are only allowed to contact the HR services of the institutions or perhaps EPSO?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I understand it. So, are the recruiting services obliged to give information to successful CAST candidates? About the process. So
Yeah.
what happens that before testing, they will not give you any information. You probably will not even know who has sent you for testing. And then when you have a successful test, then you will get more information, further information about the recruitment process itself. And then, yes, they have to give you information what the recruitment process is about. In some cases, they have written tests as well. Some cases, they have only interview. They also have to inform you about the panel composition. So there's many information that then they are obliged to inform you about, but not before a successful CAST.
I think this is a very important point worth emphasizing, that it's a bit of a black box at the very early stages, isn't it? So you do get an invitation to sit a test without actually knowing who's behind it, right?
Yes. What I think we can say as a sum up that this is a system which is let's say more transparent than it was in the past, but still not completely transparent, as you don't have a clear idea where there are available CAST positions. So you can't just simply apply for open vacancies in all the cases. So, yeah.
Just to take a step back, zoom out a bit, where it's coming from. This is it's essentially a hybrid of the classic Absol selection system, where they are looking for eligible candidates, and there's a pool of eligible candidates. And on the other side, for the CAST, they're looking for candidates for specific tasks, for specific vacancies. So it's a bit of a hybrid where they want to see your general eligibility, that you have the overall skills, knowledge, etc., and at the same time trying to place you in a specific job. So hence this semi-secrecy or lack of full transparency, where they test what you're eligible for, and you might then go on into a specific job interview. But then if that doesn't work out, you should still be eligible for other posts in different EU institutions. There was a quick question here about how do they test the language knowledge. There's no direct test on linguistic knowledge, and you don't need any certificate either. It's all on self-declaration, because ultimately you'll need to sit the tests, and ultimately you'll need to go to the interview, and that is where your linguistic skills will be essentially tested. So a couple of other questions. Does speaking more than 2 languages, official EU or otherwise, make you a more interesting candidate, or it doesn't matter so much?
Well, I think it depends on the profile of the job that you are applying for. So if you are applying to the delegation, of course, speaking the local language can be a great asset. In other cases, it's not that important. So it really depends on what kind of job you are applying for. In generally speaking, I think the more languages you speak, the better it is in the EU institutions.
Absolutely. And regarding the question regime is, so the abstract verbal numerical reasoning tests are taken in language 1, and we're proud to say that we have 17 languages available for verbal reasoning, and the competency tests are in language 2, so that's English, French, or German. And then a couple of other questions. There's no lawyer linguist profile on CAST level, so is it wiser to go via translator CAST or law CAST as a step towards a longer term goal of working as a lawyer linguist? Perhaps me as a former lawyer linguist, I would say in this case, I probably would go for the linguist side, though I don't have very strong opinion on that, because if your profile or your aim is really to be a lawyer linguist, you will eventually need to apply for the EPSO AD competition for lawyer linguists. So demonstrating, showcasing your experience either as a lawyer, either as a linguist / translator would help you in any case. So if I really have to choose, I probably would say the linguistic side needs to be proven, because the legal side you can prove through your diploma. All right, let's see a couple of other questions.
I saw a question with regards to the relax examination, which was done in the past as well.
So that's
my guess would be the same, that it's probably still valid.
Just to define, so relax for those of you who are not been here for so many years, as Anna and I, it's the external relations based on its French abbreviation. So external relations.
Yeah. And definitely it's not only available for the delegation. So my guess on the basis of the CAST 2007 one, that this is probably then also available, and definitely not only you are not only recruitable in the delegations, but also in the agencies in Brussels and in the larger organizations as well.
Right. I think with that, Anna, we'll stop here. And I know that there are a couple of questions that we didn't have time to answer. I hope we covered still a lot of ground, and hopefully this was informative. We tried to really provide you as much information as possible with practical tips. And we do rely on Anna's great expertise, who's seen all of this from the inside, and she's been sharing her knowledge with many, many candidates as a coach and as a trainer. So that's fantastic. Let us know if we can be helpful with anything else. Do send us a message through our contact form, or reach out to us on any medium or channel. We'll be more than happy to answer. And a huge thanks to Veronica and Lenka for making all of this possible and ensuring that everything went so smooth. That's great. Thank you, ladies. And with that, do let us know further questions. We'll be providing the recording, the transcript, the slides, and basically everything that we've covered to you through email. It's going to be available on our website. Make good use of the special promotion that we have put here, and share all of this with your friends and whoever is interested in the CAST exams, because they might find it useful, and it might be a little less mysterious than an hour and a half ago.
Thanks a lot for also for your very active participation from my side, and for all the lovely questions. I hope we could cover most of them, and have a lovely evening.
All right, and just for you who stayed so long, we're going to turn on the camera and say good night. So thanks for being here, and hope to see you virtually or in person soon. Good. See you. Good luck.